Victoria Matthews stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, watching the city lights blur through her tears. 25 years of marriage, and she had just discovered the most painful truth of her life. Her husband, Richard, the man she had built an empire with, was having an affair with his young secretary, Emma. The discovery had been purely accidental. Victoria had returned early from her business trip to Paris, excited to surprise Richard for their anniversary. Instead, she found herself hiding behind the marble pillar in their own home, watching her husband kiss another woman in their living room. The woman was barely 30, with flowing blonde hair and a figure that reminded Victoria of her younger self. Victoria's hands trembled as she remembered Richard's words to Emma that evening. "Victoria suspects nothing. She's so busy with her charity work and social events, she doesn't even notice I exist anymore." The cruel laughter that followed still echoed in her mind. For weeks after that devastating night, Victoria struggled with what to do. She was not just Richard's wife, she was his business partner. Together they had built Matthews Industries from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar corporation. Richard handled the technical side while Victoria managed investments, partnerships, and strategic planning. Their success had made them one of the most powerful couples in the country, but now everything felt like a lie. Victoria began to notice things she had previously ignored. Richard's late nights at the office, his secretive phone calls, his sudden interest in fitness and new clothes. Emma had been working as his personal assistant for 2 years, and Victoria realized the affair had probably been going on for most of that time. The thought that hurt most was Richard's assumption that she was oblivious. Victoria had always been incredibly intelligent and observant. She had graduated top of her class from Harvard Business School and had an almost supernatural ability to read people and situations. The fact that Richard thought she was some naive housewife who could be easily fooled felt like the ultimate insult. Victoria spent sleepless nights planning her next move. Divorce was the obvious choice, but it would be complicated. Their businesses were intertwined, their assets shared, and their social circles overlapped completely. More importantly, Victoria wanted to know the full extent of Richard's betrayal. Was Emma the first affair, or were there others? Was Richard stealing money from their joint accounts to fund his secret life? How many people knew about his infidelity and were laughing at her behind her back? One morning, while having coffee with her best friend Sarah, an idea began to form. Sarah was complaining about her own husband's suspicious behavior and mentioned how she wished she could be invisible to catch him in the act. "Sometimes I think the only way to really know what people are doing is to disappear completely," Sarah said. "Make them think you can't see what's right in front of you." That evening, Victoria stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. At 52, she was still beautiful, with striking green eyes and auburn hair that she kept perfectly styled. Those eyes had seen too much lately, and perhaps it was time to make others believe they could see nothing at all. The plan that formed in Victoria's mind was audacious and risky, but it was also brilliant. She would pretend to lose her sight gradually, making Richard and everyone around her believe she was going blind. This would give her the perfect cover to observe their behavior without suspicion. People always acted differently around someone they perceived as vulnerable or disabled. They would let their guard down, speak more freely, and reveal their true selves. Victoria began researching blindness extensively. She studied the medical conditions that could cause gradual vision loss, the stages of adaptation, and the behavioral changes that people experienced. She watched documentaries, read memoirs, and even secretly observed blind individuals in public to understand their mannerisms and techniques. The medical cover story would be simple. Victoria had always been prone to severe migraines, a fact well known to Richard and their social circle. She would claim that her doctor had discovered a rare neurological condition that was affecting her optic nerves. The vision loss would be gradual but irreversible, giving her time to perfect her act while gathering information. Victoria also realized this plan would test not just Richard's fidelity, but his character entirely. Would he be a supportive husband to a disabled wife, or would he see her condition as an opportunity to be even more reckless with his affair? The answer would tell her everything she needed to know about the man she had shared her life with. The first step was establishing the medical timeline. Victoria made an appointment with Dr. Harrison, their family physician, complaining of worsening migraines and occasional vision problems. She was careful to describe symptoms that could indicate several different conditions, allowing her to control the narrative as it developed. Dr. Harrison, a kind man in his 60s who had known the Matthews family for years, was immediately concerned. He scheduled Victoria for comprehensive tests and referred her to a neurologist. Victoria knew she would need to be careful during these appointments, showing just enough symptoms to support her story without triggering tests that could expose her deception. As Victoria prepared to begin her elaborate charade, she felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. Excitement because she would finally get the truth about her marriage, and sadness because she already suspected what that truth would reveal. She had loved Richard deeply, and part of her hoped that her disability would bring out his better nature, that he would end his affair and become the devoted husband she had always believed him to be. But deep down, Victoria knew better. She had not built a billion-dollar business empire by being naive or overly optimistic. Richard had already shown her who he really was when he thought she wasn't looking. Now she would give him even more opportunity to reveal his true character, and she would be watching every moment. The next morning, Victoria woke up and began her performance. She would start slowly with subtle signs of vision problems that would gradually worsen over the coming weeks. By the time she was completely blind, she would have all the evidence she needed to destroy Richard's life just as thoroughly as he had destroyed hers. Justice, Victoria had learned, was best served by those patient enough to plan it properly. Victoria's performance began subtly. During breakfast the next morning, she squinted slightly while reading her tablet, rubbing her temples as if fighting a headache. Richard barely looked up from his own device, scrolling through emails with his usual morning coffee. "Another headache?" Richard asked absently, not really waiting for an answer. Victoria noted how quickly he dismissed her discomfort, something the old Victoria might have overlooked, but now seemed significant. "Just a bit of eye strain," Victoria replied carefully. "The text seems a little blurry this morning." Over the following days, Victoria gradually increased her symptoms. She would hesitate before picking up objects, occasionally misjudge distances, and complain of increasing sensitivity to light. Her performance was masterful, informed by hours of research and careful observation. The neurologist appointment came 2 weeks later, and Victoria was nervous but prepared. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was a sharp woman with an excellent reputation, exactly the kind of doctor who could potentially see through Victoria's deception if she wasn't careful. Victoria had spent days practicing her responses, learning to control her natural reflexes to light and movement. During the examination, she allowed herself to respond normally to most tests while showing subtle signs of impairment in specific areas that would support her story. "Mrs. Matthews," Dr. Rodriguez said after completing her tests, "I'm seeing some concerning signs. Your pupil responses are slightly delayed, and there appears to be some inflammation in your optic nerves. I'd like to run more comprehensive tests, including an MRI." Victoria's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm and concerned. "Is it serious, doctor?" "It's too early to say definitively, but we're looking at a possible inflammatory condition affecting your optic pathways. In some cases, this can lead to progressive vision loss if not treated aggressively." The beauty of Victoria's chosen condition was that inflammation could be intermittent and unpredictable, making it difficult to diagnose definitively. It also responded poorly to treatment in many cases, giving her a believable trajectory toward blindness. When Victoria returned home that evening, she found Richard in his study on a phone call. Through the partially open door, she could hear him speaking in the low, intimate tone she recognized from their early dating years. "I miss you too," Richard was saying. "Tomorrow night should work. Victoria has another doctor's appointment, so she'll probably be tired and go to bed early." Victoria felt a familiar stab of pain but forced herself to think strategically. This was exactly the kind of information she needed to gather. She made a mental note of the timing and began planning how to use this knowledge to her advantage. The next few weeks followed a predictable pattern. Victoria's condition worsened gradually, giving her increasing justification to limit her activities and spend more time at home. Richard's behavior became more telling with each passing day. Instead of showing concern or offering support, Richard seemed almost relieved by Victoria's increasing dependence. He volunteered to handle more of their social obligations alone, claiming he didn't want to tire her with too many events. Victoria realized he was using her condition as an excuse to spend more time with Emma without suspicion. The most revealing moment came when Victoria accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Richard and his brother Michael. Victoria had been practicing walking with a white cane in her bedroom when she heard Richard's voice carry up from the garden below. "Honestly, Mike, it might be a blessing in disguise," Richard was saying. "Victoria's always been so controlling. About the business, wanting to know every detail. Now she's too distracted with her health issues to micromanage everything." Victoria gripped the cane tighter, fighting the urge to throw it out the window at her husband's head. "I know it sounds terrible," Richard continued, "but I feel like I can finally make decisions without having to run everything by her first. And Emma's been incredibly helpful with the transition." The casual way Richard mentioned Emma's name, as if she were simply a capable employee rather than his mistress, made Victoria's blood boil. But what infuriated her most was his suggestion that her supposed blindness was somehow liberating for him professionally. Victoria had always been the strategic mind behind their business success. While Richard was undoubtedly talented with technology and product development, Victoria's investment decisions and partnership negotiations had been crucial to their growth. The idea that he saw her involvement as mere micromanagement was both insulting and revealing. That evening, Victoria decided to test Richard's loyalty more directly. She waited until they were having dinner together, a rare occurrence lately, and brought up her fears about the future. "Richard," she said, allowing her voice to tremble slightly, "Dr. Rodriguez thinks my condition might be irreversible. I'm scared about what this means for us, for our life together." Richard reached across the table and took her hand, but Victoria could feel the mechanical nature of the gesture. "We'll figure it out, Vic. You're strong. You'll adapt." "But what? If I can't work anymore? What if I become a burden?" Victoria watched Richard's face carefully, noting the micro-expressions that crossed his features. "Let's not think about worst-case scenarios," Richard replied, but Victoria caught the flash of calculation in his eyes. "We have excellent disability insurance, and the company is stable enough to handle any transition." Victoria realized with crystalline clarity that Richard was already planning a future without her active involvement in their business. Worse, he seemed to be looking forward to it. The final confirmation of Richard's character came 2 nights later. Victoria had spent the evening practicing her mobility techniques, learning to navigate their penthouse while appearing to have severely limited vision. She had become quite skilled at moving confidently through familiar spaces while maintaining the illusion of uncertainty. Around 11 p.m., Victoria heard Richard's phone buzz with a text message. She watched through barely opened eyes as he read it, smiled, and quietly began getting dressed again. "Where are you going?" Victoria asked, sitting up in bed. "Emergency at the office," Richard lied smoothly. "One of our servers crashed and I need to supervise the repair personally." Victoria knew this was impossible. Their IT department had round-the-clock support, and any genuine emergency would involve multiple phone calls and team coordination, not a single text message. But she played her part perfectly. "Do you need me to come with you?" she offered, knowing he would refuse. "No, absolutely not. You need your rest, and there's nothing you could do there anyway." The casual dismissal stung, but Victoria filed it, away with all the other evidence she was gathering. As soon as Richard left, she carefully made her way to the window and watched him get into his car. Instead of heading toward their office building, he drove in the direction of Emma's apartment complex. Victoria stood in the darkness of their bedroom, processing the full scope of Richard's betrayal. He was not only having an affair, but using her illness as cover for his infidelity. He was planning to sideline her professionally while maintaining access to her wealth and business acumen when convenient. Most damaging of all, he clearly saw her potential disability as an opportunity rather than a challenge they would face together. The old Victoria might have confronted him immediately, but the new Victoria was playing a longer game. She was gathering evidence not just of infidelity, but of financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional abuse. When she was ready to strike, she would have enough ammunition to destroy Richard completely. But first, she needed to become completely blind and see just how far Richard would go when he thought she was helpless. 3 months into her elaborate deception, Victoria had perfected the art of being blind. She moved through their penthouse with carefully practiced uncertainty, using furniture and walls for guidance while secretly observing everything around her. Her performance was so convincing that even their longtime housekeeper, Maria, had begun speaking more loudly and slowly to her, as if blindness had somehow affected her hearing and intelligence. The transformation in how people treated her was both fascinating and infuriating. Victoria had always commanded respect in business meetings and social gatherings, but now she noticed how quickly people dismissed her presence. Conversations continued around her as if she weren't there, and decisions were made without consulting her input. It was a masterclass in how society viewed disability, and Victoria filed away these observations for future use. Richard's behavior had become increasingly bold. He no longer bothered to hide his phone calls with Emma, taking them openly while Victoria was in the room. During one particularly revealing conversation, Victoria listened as Richard discussed their upcoming quarterly board meeting. "Don't worry about Victoria," Richard told Emma. "She's stepping back from day-to-day operations due to her condition. I'll be presenting the new partnership proposal myself." Victoria's blood ran cold. The partnership proposal he was referring to was her project, something she had been developing for months before her supposed illness began. It was a complex deal with a European tech consortium that could expand their business internationally and increase their revenue by 40%. Victoria had done all the preliminary negotiations and strategic planning, but apparently Richard was planning to take full credit. That afternoon, Victoria made a phone call to her private attorney, James Chen, using a secure line she had installed in her home office. James had been her personal lawyer for 15 years, handling her individual investments and legal matters separate from the joint business with Richard. "James," Victoria said quietly, "I need you to begin documenting some potential corporate misconduct issues. I can't give you all the details yet, but I need you to start building a file." "Victoria, are you all right? Richard mentioned your health issues, and I've been concerned." "I'm fine, James. Better than fine, actually. But I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" James had worked with Victoria long enough to know that her instincts were usually correct. "Of course. What do you need?" "I want you to request copies of all corporate communications, financial transfers, and board meeting minutes for the past 6 months. Use your authority as my personal counsel to access anything related to my interests in the company." "That's a broad request, Victoria. Are you sure you don't want to tell me what you're looking for?" "Not yet. But James, I also need you to begin preliminary research on divorce proceedings for high-net-worth couples with complex business holdings. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Victoria, I think we should meet in person. Not yet. For now, just do as I ask. And James, absolute confidentiality on this. No one can know we've spoken. That evening, Victoria decided to test the limits of Richard's deception. She had been playing the role of a woman gradually losing her independence, but now she wanted to see how Richard would react to her seeming completely helpless. During dinner, Victoria deliberately knocked over her water glass, letting it crash to the floor. She made a show of reaching around blindly, appearing confused and frustrated. "I'm sorry," she said, allowing her voice to crack with emotion. "I feel so useless lately. I can't even have dinner without making a mess." Richard's response was telling. Instead of immediately helping her, he finished chewing his food and casually reached for the napkin to clean up the spill. "It's fine, Vic. Accidents happen." His tone was more annoyed than sympathetic. Victoria noted that he didn't even get up from his chair to help her properly, leaving her to feel around for broken glass pieces that could have cut her hands. The old Richard would have been on his feet immediately, concerned for her safety and comfort. Later that night, Victoria overheard Richard on another phone call with Emma. They were making plans for a weekend getaway to Richard's cabin upstate, the same cabin where Victoria and Richard had spent their honeymoon 25 years earlier. "She'll never know," Richard told Emma. "I'll tell her it's a business retreat. Victoria can't drive anymore, and she's been so dependent lately that she won't question it." The casual cruelty of using their honeymoon location for his affair was breathtaking, but Victoria forced herself to remain calm. She was building a case, and emotional reactions would only compromise her position. The next morning, Victoria put her acting skills to the ultimate test. She waited until Richard was in his study, then carefully made her way to his office using her white cane for sound cover. She had learned to move silently when necessary, but the cane provided perfect camouflage for her real movements. Richard was at his computer, and Victoria positioned herself where she could see his screen while appearing to struggle with navigating the doorway. What she saw made her stomach turn. Richard was transferring money from their joint business account to a personal account that Victoria didn't recognize. The amounts were significant, over $200,000, and the transactions were coded as consulting fees to a company called Strategic Solutions LLC. Victoria memorized the account numbers and company name, then made a show of bumping into the doorframe. "Richard, are you in here? I thought I heard typing." Richard quickly minimized his screen and turned around, his face showing a flash of guilt, before settling into practiced concern. "I'm here, honey. Just catching up on some paperwork. Do you need something?" "I was looking for my phone. I think I left it in here yesterday." Richard stood up and guided her to a chair, then made a show of looking around the office. "I don't see it in here. Maybe check the living room?" Victoria allowed him to escort her out, but she had seen enough. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was stealing from their joint assets to fund his secret life. Strategic Solutions LLC was probably a shell company he had created to siphon money without detection. That afternoon, Victoria called James Chen again. "James, I need you to investigate a company called Strategic Solutions LLC. I want to know who owns it, when it was incorporated, and what services it supposedly provides." "Victoria, this is getting serious. What exactly is going on?" "Richard is stealing from our joint business accounts, and I believe he's using the money to support his affair. I need proof before I make any moves." James was quiet for a moment. "How much money are we talking about?" "I saw a transfer for $200,000 today, but I suspect it's been going on for months." "James, I also need you to start protecting my personal assets. I want them separated from anything Richard can access." "I can start that process immediately." "Victoria, given what you're telling me, I strongly recommend we meet in person soon. This kind of financial misconduct could have serious legal implications." "Soon, James." but I need to gather more evidence first. That evening, Victoria made a decision that would escalate her investigation considerably. She would use her supposed blindness to attend Richard's business meetings, presenting herself as a supportive but helpless wife who posed no threat to his schemes. The next day, Richard announced he was meeting with potential investors for a new project. Victoria knew this was likely another cover story for spending time with Emma, but she decided to call his bluff. "I'd like to come with you," Victoria said during breakfast. "I know I can't contribute much anymore, but I miss being involved in the business." Richard's face went through several emotions before settling on fake sympathy. "Vic, these meetings can be long and boring. Wouldn't you be more comfortable at home?" "Please, Richard, I feel so isolated lately. Even if I just sit quietly, it would mean a lot to me to feel useful again." Victoria could see Richard calculating the risks. Taking her along would limit his freedom, but refusing might seem suspicious or cruel. "All right," he said finally, "but it's going to be a long day." Victoria smiled and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for understanding." As they prepared to leave for the meeting, Victoria felt a mixture of anticipation and disgust. She was about to witness firsthand how far Richard's deception extended, and she suspected the revelations would be even worse than she had imagined. But she was ready. After months of playing the helpless victim, Victoria was prepared to show Richard and everyone else what a truly powerful woman could accomplish when she had been underestimated. The business meeting turned out to be lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown, and Victoria quickly realized why Richard had been reluctant to bring her along. Emma was there, introduced as his senior project coordinator, and the supposed investors were actually Emma's friends celebrating her birthday. Victoria sat quietly at the table, playing her role perfectly while internally seething at the elaborate deception. Richard had used their joint credit card to pay for an expensive birthday celebration for his mistress, all while telling Victoria they needed to cut back on personal expenses due to her medical bills. "Victoria, how are you feeling?" Emma asked, with false sweetness. "Richard told us about your condition. It must be so difficult." Victoria smiled graciously, noting how Emma's voice carried just a hint of satisfaction. "I'm managing, thank you. Richard has been wonderfully supportive." "He's such a dedicated husband," Emma replied, reaching across the table to squeeze Richard's hand. "Always putting others first." The boldness of Emma touching Richard right in front of her was staggering, but Victoria maintained her composure. She was gathering evidence, and every moment of this charade was building her case. During the meal, Victoria listened carefully to the conversation around her. Richard was discussing business matters with casual disregard for confidentiality, sharing details about upcoming mergers and client relationships that should never have been discussed outside the company. Emma was taking notes, claiming it was for project coordination, but Victoria realized she was likely documenting sensitive information for purposes Victoria didn't yet understand. The most shocking revelation came when Richard stepped away to take a phone call. One of Emma's friends, clearly drunk and unaware of Victoria's sharp hearing, leaned over to Emma. "Girl, you've got it made," the friend whispered. "A rich older man, and his wife can't even see what's happening right under her nose. When are you going to make your move?" Emma glanced nervously at Victoria, then whispered back, "Soon." Richard's been talking about restructuring the business once Victoria steps down completely. There might be opportunities for people who've been loyal to him. Victoria's mind raced as she processed this information. Emma wasn't just Richard's mistress. She was positioning herself to take over Victoria's role in the business. The betrayal was even more comprehensive than Victoria had imagined. When Richard returned from his call, Victoria decided to test her theory. "Darling," she said sweetly, "I've been thinking about what we discussed earlier. Maybe it would be best if I stepped back from the business entirely. This condition is so unpredictable, and I don't want to hold the company back." Richard's face lit up with poorly concealed excitement. "Are you sure, Vic? I know how much the business means to you. I'm sure. Perhaps Emma could take on more responsibilities. She seems very capable." Emma's face flushed with pleasure. "I'd be honored to help in any way I can, Mrs. Matthews." Victoria smiled and nodded, all while mentally documenting Emma's eagerness to replace her. The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of their plan. Richard and Emma had been discussing a complete corporate restructuring that would effectively push Victoria out while maintaining access to her financial resources and business connections. That afternoon, Victoria excused herself to use the restaurant's restroom, using the opportunity to make a quick phone call to James Chen. "James, it's worse than we thought. I need you to immediately secure my voting rights in the company. Richard's planning a hostile restructuring." "Victoria, where are you calling from?" "A restaurant restroom. I can't talk long. Emma isn't just Richard's mistress. She's his business partner in this scheme. They're planning to push me out entirely. I can file emergency injunctions to protect your interests, but I need more details. Tonight. I'll call you tonight with everything." Victoria returned to the table, maintaining her facade of helpless dependence, while Richard and Emma continued their celebration. As the afternoon wore on, their behavior became increasingly bold. Richard openly held Emma's hand, and Emma made several comments about future plans that clearly didn't include Victoria. The drive home was particularly revealing. Richard, emboldened by what he perceived as Victoria's complete trust, began discussing his plans openly. "I think your idea about stepping back is smart, Vic," he said. "The stress of trying to keep up with everything must be overwhelming with your condition." "What would happen to my share of the business?" Victoria asked innocently. "Oh, don't worry about that. I'd make sure everything is handled properly. You'd still benefit financially, but without the day-to-day stress." Victoria recognized this as corporate speak for being bought out at below market value or having her shares transferred to a trust that Richard would control. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. That evening, Victoria made the most important phone call of her investigation. Using a secure line, she contacted her old friend Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. "Marcus, I need your help with a delicate situation. My husband is having an affair, stealing from our joint business, and planning to force me out of the company." "Victoria Matthews? I heard about your health issues. Are you sure you're up for this kind of investigation?" "Marcus, I need you to understand something. My blindness isn't real. It's a cover to gather evidence against Richard." There was a long pause. "You've been pretending to be blind?" "For 4 months. And it's given me a front-row seat to watch my husband destroy our marriage and our business. I need you to help me document everything." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's either brilliant or insane." "Probably both. But Marcus, I've discovered financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit corporate theft. This goes way beyond simple adultery. What do you need from me?" "I need surveillance on Richard and Emma. I need documentation of their meetings, their financial transactions, and their communications. I also need you to investigate Strategic Solutions LLC and find out how much money Richard has stolen. How long do we have?" "Richard's planning to present a restructuring proposal to the board next month. I need to move before then, but I also need to be completely prepared when I do." Marcus agreed to begin immediate surveillance, and Victoria felt a sense of relief for the first time in months. She was no longer gathering evidence alone. The next few days brought even more shocking revelations. With Marcus conducting external surveillance and Victoria maintaining her internal observation, they quickly uncovered the full extent of Richard and Emma's scheme. Richard had been systematically transferring company assets to shell companies that Emma controlled. The European partnership deal that Victoria had developed was being restructured to benefit these shell companies, rather than their legitimate business. Most damaging of all, Richard had been sharing confidential client information with competitors, apparently selling trade secrets to fund his lavish lifestyle with Emma. The evidence was overwhelming, but Victoria wanted one final piece of proof before she made her move. She needed Richard to explicitly admit his intentions, preferably in a recorded conversation that could be used in court. Victoria's opportunity came when Richard announced another business trip, this one supposedly to finalize the European partnership deal. Victoria knew this was actually a romantic getaway with Emma, but she saw it as the perfect chance to set her trap. "I wish I could come with you," Victoria said wistfully. "This deal was so important to me." "I know, honey, but international travel would be too stressful with your condition. Besides, Emma has been handling most of the details lately." "Emma's going with you?" "Just for business support. You know how complex these international deals can be." Victoria nodded, understanding, but internally she was preparing for the final phase of her plan. When Richard and Emma returned from their trip, they would find a very different Victoria waiting for them. The blind, helpless wife they thought they had manipulated was about to show them what real power looked like. While Richard and Emma were on their romantic getaway disguised as a business trip, Victoria executed the most crucial phase of her plan. Working with Marcus Webb and James Chen, she spent 3 days building an ironclad case that would destroy Richard professionally, personally, and financially. Marcus had been busy during the surveillance operation. He provided Victoria with photographs of Richard and Emma together at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and even at the cabin where Victoria and Richard had spent their honeymoon. The images were damning, showing intimate moments and expensive gifts that Richard had clearly purchased with their joint funds, but the photographs were just the beginning. Marcus had also uncovered the full network of shell companies that Richard had created. Strategic Solutions LLC was part of a complex web of fake businesses designed to funnel money from their legitimate company into accounts that Richard and Emma controlled. The total amount stolen was staggering, over $2 million in the past year alone. James Chen had been equally productive. Using his legal authority to access company records, he had documented every fraudulent transaction, every breach of fiduciary duty, and every instance of corporate misconduct. The evidence filled 3 thick binders and would be more than sufficient to pursue both civil and criminal charges. "Victoria," James said during one of their secure phone calls, "what Richard has done goes beyond simple embezzlement. He's committed securities fraud, violated his fiduciary duties as a corporate officer, and potentially committed tax fraud. This could result in serious prison time." "Good," Victoria replied coldly. "He destroyed our marriage and tried to steal my life's work. He deserves everything that's coming to him." But Victoria wasn't just focused on punishment. She was also planning her own corporate survival. Working with James, she had quietly secured the support of 3 key board members who were loyal to her personally and concerned about Richard's recent behavior. Victoria had always been more popular with the board than Richard, partly because of her strategic brilliance and partly because of her genuine concern for the company's long-term health. The most crucial ally was board member Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired tech executive who had mentored Victoria early in her career. Patricia had been suspicious of Richard's recent proposals and was shocked when James privately briefed her on the evidence of fraud. "I knew something was wrong," Patricia told Victoria during a secret meeting at Patricia's home. "Richard's been pushing through decisions without proper documentation, and some of his financial requests didn't make sense. But I never imagined anything this extensive. Patricia, I need to know I can count on your support when this becomes public. Richard will try to claim that my blindness makes me unfit to run the company." Patricia smiled grimly. "Victoria, if you've been managing this investigation while supposedly blind, I'd say your fitness to run the company has never been in question." Victoria also reached out to their key clients and business partners, carefully laying groundwork without revealing her plans. She scheduled phone calls to update them on various projects, demonstrating her continued mental acuity and deep knowledge of their business relationships. When Richard's fraud became public, Victoria wanted to ensure that clients knew the company remained in capable hands. The most satisfying part of Victoria's preparation was arranging for Emma's downfall. Through Marcus's investigation, Victoria had discovered that Emma had been sharing confidential company information with competitors in exchange for personal payments. This wasn't just adultery or gold digging, it was industrial espionage. Victoria arranged for this information to be quietly shared with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Emma would find herself facing federal charges for corporate espionage in addition to whatever civil liability she faced for the fraud scheme. 3 days before Richard and Emma were scheduled to return, Victoria received the final piece of evidence she needed. Marcus had managed to obtain recordings of Richard's phone calls during the trip, including one devastating conversation where Richard explicitly discussed his plans to force Victoria out of the company. "Once we get back, I'll start pushing the disability angle harder," Richard's voice said clearly on the recording. "Victoria's condition gives us the perfect excuse to restructure everything. The board will have to agree that she's no longer competent to make major decisions." Emma's laughter could be heard in the background. "And then I can step into her role officially?" "Absolutely. We'll present it as a natural transition. Victoria gets to keep her dignity, and we get control of the company. She'll never know what hit her." The casual cruelty in Richard's voice made Victoria's hands shake with rage, but she forced herself to remain focused. This recording was perfect evidence of conspiracy and would be devastating in court. Victoria spent her final day of preparation making one last crucial arrangement. She contacted the company's head of security, David Morrison, a former FBI agent, who had always respected Victoria's leadership. David had been concerned about some irregularities he'd noticed in company systems and was eager to help when Victoria explained the situation. "Mrs. Matthews, I've been documenting some suspicious network activity for weeks," David told her during a private meeting. "Someone's been accessing confidential files after hours and copying them to external drives. I suspected corporate espionage but didn't have enough evidence to act." "That someone is probably Emma," Victoria replied. "David, I need you to be present when I confront Richard. Things might get ugly and I want a witness." David nodded grimly. "After what you've told me, I think we should also have law enforcement present." "Not yet. I want to give Richard a chance to confess first. If he cooperates, we might be able to handle this quietly. If not, then we'll bring in the authorities, the FIC." Night before Richard's return, Victoria made one final call to Dr. Rodriguez, her neurologist. It was time to end the medical charade that had made everything else possible. "Doctor, I need to schedule an emergency appointment," Victoria said. "I think there's been a dramatic change in my condition." "What kind of change, Mrs. Matthews?" "I think my vision might be returning. It's hard to explain, but I'm starting to see things much more clearly." Dr. Rodriguez was intrigued and scheduled Victoria for tests the next afternoon. Victoria knew the examination would reveal that her vision had never been impaired, but she had a plan for explaining this miraculous recovery that would protect her from accusations of fraud. The morning of Richard's return, Victoria prepared herself carefully. She dressed in her most professional business suit, the one she had worn to their most important board meetings. She arranged for Maria, their housekeeper, to take the day off, ensuring privacy for the confrontation ahead. Victoria also made sure that Marcus Webb was positioned outside with photographic equipment, and that James Chen was standing by with legal documents. David Morrison arrived early and positioned himself in the home office, where he could monitor everything through the security system. At precisely 2 p.m., Victoria heard Richard's car pull into their driveway. Through the window, she could see Emma, in the passenger seat, laughing at something Richard had said. They looked relaxed and happy, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. Victoria took her position in the living room, sitting calmly in her favorite chair with a cup of tea. She had removed her dark glasses and put away her white cane. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to look directly at things without pretending to struggle with vision problems. The front door opened, and Richard called out in his usual cheerful voice, "Victoria? We're home. The trip went even better than expected." "I'm in the living room, darling," Victoria replied sweetly. "Please, both of you come in. I have some wonderful news to share." Richard and Emma entered the room together, and Victoria noted with satisfaction how shocked they looked to see her sitting normally, making direct eye contact with both of them. "Victoria," Richard said slowly, "you're not wearing your glasses." Victoria smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a genuinely predatory expression. "That's because I don't need them anymore, Richard. My vision has returned completely. In fact, I can see everything much more clearly than I ever could before." The color drained from Richard's face as the implications of her statement began to sink in. Emma took a step backward, her hand instinctively reaching for Richard's arm. "I don't understand," Richard stammered. "Dr. Rodriguez said your condition was irreversible." "Dr. Rodriguez said many things," Victoria replied calmly. "But the most important thing she's going to say is that there's no medical record of me ever having any vision problems at all. Funny how these miraculous recoveries work." Richard's face went through several emotions before settling on fear. "Victoria, what are you saying?" Victoria stood up gracefully, moving with the confident precision that had been hidden for months. "I'm saying that I've been watching you both very carefully for the past 4 months. And what I've seen has been Mrs. Matthews. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, Emma. But it's been yours, and Richard's. You both assumed that I was helpless, blind, and stupid. You were wrong on all 3 counts." Victoria walked to the window, moving normally for the first time in front of Richard and Emma. Victoria savored the moment of complete silence that followed David's announcement. Richard and Emma stood frozen in the middle of her living room, finally understanding that they had walked into a carefully prepared trap. "Sit down, both of you," Victoria commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most feared negotiators in the business world. "We have a lot to discuss." Richard moved mechanically to the couch, his face pale and drawn. Emma remained standing until Victoria's cold stare convinced her to comply. David opened his laptop and began displaying the evidence on the large television screen mounted on the wall. The first image was a photograph of Richard and Emma kissing outside an expensive restaurant, clearly taken during one of their supposed business meetings. "This was taken 6 months ago," Victoria said calmly. "Marcus Webb has been documenting your affair extensively. Would you like to see more?" The slideshow continued with dozens of photographs showing Richard and Emma together at hotels, restaurants, and even at the cabin. Each image was time-stamped and geotagged, creating an irrefutable record of their relationship. "Stop," Richard whispered, but Victoria continued the presentation. "Now let's discuss the financial fraud," Victoria said as David switched to spreadsheets, showing the shell company transactions. $2.3 million stolen from our joint business accounts over the past 18 months. "Richard, did you really think I wouldn't notice eventually?" Emma started sobbing openly. "We were going to pay it back. Once the company restructuring was complete, we were going to replace all the money." Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "With what money, Emma? The money you were stealing from our competitors?" "Yes, I know about that too." David displayed the next set of evidence. Emails between Emma and representatives from 3 different competing companies, clearly showing the sale of confidential information. "Industrial espionage is a federal crime," Victoria continued. "The FBI is very interested in speaking with you about this, Emma." Richard finally found his voice. "Victoria, please. We can work this out. The affair was a mistake and the money situation got out of hand, but we can fix this. Can we? Victoria moved to stand directly in front of her husband, looking down at him with disgust. Can you fix 25 years of marriage, Richard? Can you fix the fact that you plan to have me declared mentally incompetent? Can you fix the fact that you celebrated my supposed disability as an opportunity to steal my life's work? She gestured to David, who played the recorded phone conversation from their trip. Richard's voice filled the room, discussing plans to push Victoria out of the company and transfer control to Emma. The board will have to agree that she's no longer competent to make major decisions, Richard's recorded voice said. Emma's laughter, in the background, sounded even more cruel in the silence of their living room. When the recording ended, Richard had tears in his eyes. Victoria, I know how this looks, but you have to understand the pressure I've been under. The business, the expectations, everything. The pressure. Victoria's voice rose for the first time. You think you've been under pressure? I built this company with you from nothing. I made the connections. I negotiated the deals. I managed the finances that you've been stealing from. And when I supposedly went blind instead of supporting me, you saw it as an opportunity to betray me even more completely. Victoria walked to the window, looking out at the city where their business empire was headquartered. But you know what the most pathetic part is, Richard? You're not even good at being evil. Your shell companies were incorporated in your own name. Your affair was conducted at restaurants where everyone knows us. Your financial fraud left electronic trails that a first-year accounting student could follow. She turned back to face them. If you were going to destroy our marriage and steal my company, you could have at least been competent about it. Emma wiped her eyes and tried one last desperate plea. Mrs. Matthews, I know you have every right to hate me, but Richard really does love you. He talked about you all the time. Victoria's expression hardened. Emma, let me explain something to you. Love doesn't involve planning to have your spouse declared mentally incompetent. Love doesn't involve stealing their money to fund your affair. Love doesn't involve using their supposed disability as cover for betrayal. She paused, letting the words sink in. What Richard feels for me is ownership, not love. He wanted to keep the benefits of being married to me while having the freedom to be with you. That's not love, that's sociopathy. David cleared his throat. Mrs. Matthews, should I contact the authorities now? Victoria held up a hand. Not yet, David. I want to give Richard and Emma a choice. She returned to her chair, sitting with the regal composure that had made her legendary in boardroom negotiations. Here's what's going to happen. Richard, you're going to resign from all your positions in our company immediately. You're going to sign documents transferring your shares to me at fair market value, minus the money you've stolen, of course. Richard started to protest, but Victoria cut him off. You're also going to cooperate fully with our accountants to identify and return every penny you've stolen. If you do this quietly and completely, I might be convinced not to pursue criminal charges. And Emma, Victoria continued, you're going to resign from the company immediately and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You're also going to cooperate with the FBI investigation into your industrial espionage activities. Emma looked confused. What FBI investigation? Victoria smiled coldly. The one that began 3 days ago when I provided them with evidence of your activities. They're very interested in your communications with our competitors. The room fell silent as Richard and Emma processed their options. Finally, Richard spoke in a defeated voice. What about our marriage? Victoria's laugh was bitter. Our marriage ended the day you decided to betray me, Richard. It just took me 4 months of playing blind to realize how completely dead it was. She stood and walked to a side table, retrieving a thick envelope. These are divorce papers. No fault, but with a complete financial disclosure requirement. You'll find the terms quite generous considering your behavior. Richard took the envelope with shaking hands. Victoria, please? Can't we at least try counseling or Counseling? Victoria's voice was incredulous. Richard, you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my company and give it to your mistress. What exactly would we discuss in counseling? Emma finally seemed to understand the full scope of their situation. What's going to happen to me? That depends largely on you, Victoria replied. If you cooperate fully and disappear from our lives completely, you might avoid prison. If you fight this or try to cause problems, I'll make sure you face the full consequences of your actions. Victoria moved to the window again, looking out at the empire she had built. You both made the mistake of thinking that because I appeared vulnerable, I was actually weak. You confused kindness with stupidity and trust with blindness. She turned back to face them one final time. I am not weak, I am not stupid, and I am definitely not blind. I am a woman who built a billion-dollar business empire through intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. Did you really believe I wouldn't notice when someone tried to steal it from me? David stepped forward. Mrs. Matthews, the board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Are you ready to present the restructuring proposal? Victoria smiled, and for the first time in months, it was genuine. Yes, David. I think it's time to show our board what real leadership looks like. As Richard and Emma left the penthouse for the last time, Victoria felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. The marriage she had cherished was over, but the business she had built would survive. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. The next morning, Victoria entered the boardroom wearing her favorite power suit and carrying the confidence that came from surviving the ultimate betrayal. She had been tested in ways she never could have imagined, and she had emerged victorious. Richard and Emma had underestimated her completely. They had seen a supposedly blind, vulnerable woman and assumed she would be easy to manipulate and discard. Instead, they had encountered a brilliant strategist who had turned their own assumptions against them. As Victoria began her presentation to the board, explaining the fraud that had been uncovered and the steps she had taken to protect the company, she realized that her fake blindness had given her a gift more valuable than sight, the absolute knowledge of who could be trusted and who could not. The company would be stronger without Richard's incompetence and Emma's betrayal. Victoria's marriage was over, but her business empire would continue to grow under her sole leadership. And if anyone in the future ever mistook her kindness for weakness again, Victoria would be ready for them. After all, she had learned that sometimes the best way to see clearly was to let others believe you couldn't see at all.